Despite all the tension unfolding away from court, the Chauvin trial is pressing forward. One of the most important jobs a prosecutor has is humanizing the victim in their case for the jury, showing them as a living person, not merely a faceless victim. So the state called their spark of life witness, Philonise Floyd, to the stand to do just that. Now, joining us now from San Francisco to discuss today's developments from court is BNC legal contributor and veteran prosecutor Paul Henderson. Okay, Paul, we talk about stuff all the time, trial and there's so many layers to this, but I just want to first get your take on what the biggest takeaways was from today.
Honestly, the biggest takeaway for me from the criminologist and the use of force was the explanation to the jury about how you cannot use force for risk. And the reason that that's important is because he outlined and explained that the risk of all these things that could have happened that didn't happen, you can't respond to with force. So in case that there were drugs in your system, and as a black man, you have superhuman strength and you could use lethal force, that did not happen. You don't meet that with force. The fact that maybe he had drugs in his system or that he could resist again as he had resisted in the past in the car when they were struggling with him, but he did not after they used force. You can't meet with more force. The fact that maybe the crowd could get excited and become violent. Those were all risks that can't be met with force. And when he broke it down in the timeline of when force was used and when force should not have been used and the limitation of the force, I thought it was an excellent explanation of the spectrum about force that the jury needed to hear as a bow on the ribbon that prosecution is trying to paint. And so I thought that was really helpful, and I hope the jury was paying attention, as I was, to understanding the nuances of a reasonable police officer's interpretation. That's really interesting to me, and I hope the jury was paying attention, because I think it will make a difference as they evaluate and become judgmental about Chauvin's actual behavior from what they saw in the testimony and evidence that's been presented to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is definitely your wheelhouse. So you don't think that this use of force expert, you think he actually contributed different information than the other experts that the state brought last week on use of force?
I do, because at a granular level, really understanding use of force is really important, I think, for a jury. And remember, the standards that we're talking about are not a reasonable person. It's a reasonable officer in those circumstances. And so having a national expert talk about use of force and unpack it in a way that a lay audience will have a better understanding of it, I think is really important. And I've been expecting a use of force expert specifically to address the perceptions that people may have about what police officers are allowed to do. This witness in particular was particularly controversial, and defense attorney Derek Nelson has fought to keep him out all throughout the trial. He did not want this person to testify, I presume for the exact reason of the evidence and testimony that we got today. Although what I thought was interesting was how this witness was limited to only talking about the officer. And they referenced it in some of the conversations going back and forth, but the judge kept him from ruling on any of the crowd perceptions. Witnesses can only talk about their present sense impressions, and he couldn't talk about the crowd and what they may have saw or observed, only what he had analyzed as an expert for what the officers were doing and what the officers were saying. I think that that's really helpful, trying to unpack that for a jury, and I think it was powerful. Let's just hope it made a difference and the jurors appreciated it, although I know the defense attorney did not appreciate it because they went back and forth all day and that didn't go anywhere.
Well, speaking of making a difference, let's talk about the spark of life witness, Philonise Floyd. Short but sweet, right? Impactful. This is where the prosecution gets to humanize the victim in this case, right? And so I was definitely looking forward to hearing him talk about George. What were your thoughts?
You know, I really thought that testimony was really difficult. It's oftentimes the hardest part of a trial like this with a homicide, to bring in a close friend, a family member, or a spouse to talk about the person. There's a lot of pressure behind the scenes for that witness to really convey everything to the jury about how important this person was, that he or she was someone that was loved, that mattered, that made a difference. And in this case in particular, it's more necessary because of the character association that we've seen with George Floyd, where so much of this trial has turned into a conversation about what his past criminal activity may have been or drug use may have been. And that's really a shame. This was the testimony to overcome all of that and paint him as the victim and reshift the focus on Chauvin and what he did, his actions, and his accountability.
Okay, veteran prosecutor and BNC legal contributor Paul Henderson, thank you so very much. I probably will see you later in the hour.